Welcome to We Don't Color on the Dog. This is one of these stories that it's a nightmare for someone who goes on vacation. August 2024, a couple from Alabama goes on vacation in Florida. The husband gets sick, seized by pain, told he needs to have an emergency surgery to remove a spleen, and the doctor removes his liver. He dies. On April 13th, the grand jury indicted the surgeon for second-degree manslaughter. Joe Zarzaur is with us. He's the attorney representing the family. Joe, thank you for coming on.
Sure. Thanks for having us, Rick. Appreciate you doing this.
This is one of these nightmare stories, isn't it?
Yes, hopefully once in a lifetime thing. I say people, it's the worst case of medical malpractice I will ever probably be associated with, in either directly or indirectly. So it's one of those situations.
Yeah, it was, I read the New York Times article. Y'all have picked up the case. This is a couple that loved going to the beach. It seems like it was chaos in the operating room when they realized that he had removed a liver, not the spleen.
Yeah, it was really chaos with him. Obviously, the lawsuit's been going on for a year and a half now, so we've done all the depositions of everybody that was in the OR, Rick. And so we have a pretty good idea of what all went down. Dr. Shagnosky was the only person that had visualization inside Mr. Bryan's abdomen at the time of the surgery. He was a bigger man, and Dr. Shagnosky's position over him was such that nobody else could really see what he was doing. Okay? The incision was not that large either, believe it or not, and Dr. Shagnosky was trying to work in a limited field, and he was on the wrong side of Mr. Bryan's body to start with, and he ended up taking his liver out for splenectomy, right? And in doing so, he transected Mr. Bryan's inferior vena cava, which is one of the largest vessels in your body. And when he did so without a clamp, obviously there was catastrophic bleeding and pretty immediate death.
One of the things I know in being an attorney, particularly in these kind of cases, taking care of personal injury and malpractice, is you have to learn a lot about medicine. It's amazing how much you get into these cases, and then figuring out how it happened. Why was the doctor so insistent on doing the surgery?
Well, there's a cynical view, Rick, that he needed to meet certain thresholds, right, for his practice, Genesis Care USA. The other thing is, I think personally he's got an ego, and I think he personally, and I'm not talking about all doctors or all surgeons, but this guy in particular had an ego such that he didn't want anybody disagreeing with his analysis. He didn't want anybody disagreeing with his recommendations, right? And I think that he felt like if he was going to justify being in the hospital as a surgeon, he needed to do surgery. Once we got into this case, we realized that obviously Mr. Bryan was not the first victim of his. A year prior to this, he had had another surgery where he had mistakenly taken out part of a pancreas instead of an adrenal gland. And then prior to that, there were probably 7 or 8 different patients of his that had really, really bad results from very simple procedures. So his practice, Genesis Care, had notice of all these things starting in 2020 when he started working there. And of course, they let him continue practicing.
Yeah, in looking at it, Joe, and it's unusual to have a grand jury step in charge with second-degree manslaughter, isn't it?
Yes, very unusual. We had a case recently in this area with Dr. Brown, Ben Brown, who was working on his wife. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And his wife passed away in his office, surgical center, and they charged him with the same exact manslaughter culpable negligence offense. I spoke with the investigating officer from the Walton County Sheriff's Office this week, and I asked him, I'm like, what took so long? Like, it almost took 2 years for you guys to charge him. And we're well into the civil lawsuit. We've taken all the 30 depositions, and y'all are just getting around to starting the criminal case. And he says, we had the hardest time because obviously before we had to go to the grand jury, and I don't if anybody in your audience knows how the grand jury works. A grand jury is the body that hears basically the probable cause of the case, right? And only one side presents that. That's the prosecution. And the prosecution presents to a grand jury, and grand jurors get a notice in the mail just like you do for regular jury duty, except a grand jury goes into a different room at the courthouse, and nobody knows that they're grand jury members. They can't tell anybody they're grand jury members, and they get to sit and listen to the prosecutors go through their list of possible cases. And they present all the evidence that the prosecution believes justifies bringing an indictment. And to do that in a medical case, Rick, you have to have a doctor to serve as an expert. Because the doctor has to come in and say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I've looked at all this stuff, a grand jury, and I think this is gross negligence or culpable negligence. Gross negligence and culpable negligence are higher than regular negligence. It's reckless conduct, where you pretty much do something knowing that somebody's going to be hurt or killed. And so they said they had the hardest time finding a doctor that had credentials as a surgeon, that was willing to testify against another surgeon that could ultimately put that surgeon in jail. And it said it took even on these facts, it took that long to find somebody willing to do that.
Wow. So where is the case with the Bryan family? How are y'all going to set to go to trial yet?
No, we're not set for trial. The hospital settled for a confidential amount. Both parties were happy with that. And now with the cases pending against Dr. Shagnosky and his practice, Genesis Care, and that case is not looking like it's going to settle, and they've denied liability. He has officially said he's not responsible for this death, and that he was a hero, and that he was trying to save Mr. Bryan's life because he had an unexpected injury, he calls it, to his inferior vena cava, and because of that, he did his best to save Mr. Bryan's life, and in doing so, he thought he was going to take the spleen out to stop the bleeding, and he inadvertently took out the liver. And the medical examiner says you don't inadvertently take out a liver because it takes, I think you have to disconnect, they said, up to 25 different connection places on the liver versus a handful for the spleen, right? And so to take out a person's liver, you have to do a lot more work. And they said that Dr. Shagnosky basically dissected this liver out of Mr. Bryan.
So does having the grand jury, the arrest, does that slow your case down? Or
yeah, that's a good question. Usually, Rick, the first thing we get as civil lawyers when a criminal case is started is a motion to stay the civil case. Yesterday, I got a call asking for a deposition of one of the other witnesses. And usually the basis of that motion is they don't want their client to have to testify because it infringes on his right of self-incrimination. But he's already testified in a 9-hour deposition in our case. So I guess that issue is pretty much already passed, thankfully. So they may make that same motion for purposes of the trial, because he will have to appear and potentially testify at the trial. If his criminal case is still going at that time, then they would have an argument to make at that motion hearing. But usually, yes, Rick, there is a delay. I don't think there's a basis for a delay because he's already given his deposition in this case.
Okay, well, if you'll keep us in the loop, I'd appreciate it, Joe. I think this is a
good.
case that a lot of people are interested in. And of course, New York Times picked up the charges,
Right.
the arrest. So it has national attention, which are the type of cases you end up taking on. You tend to be there.
It's good that we can make change as lawyers, because obviously we do it not only for the great compensation that we get from our clients' successes, but we do it to change the world, in a better way. So no trial lawyer is going to ever say they just do it for the money. And to be honest, it is one of the most rewarding things is to see things change for the better and to make everything safer for everybody that's a patient.
Thanks for watching. And to keep up with what's going on, be sure and subscribe. Just click on the little dog to the right and click the subscribe button. You can also like this video and click on the bell, which will notify you of new content. This really helps the channel grow. We appreciate you.